Hi everybody, and welcome to the next edition of It's a Fair Question. I've just finished reading this book, Jennifer. It's an emotive and a powerful story. It's written by Karen Palmer. Today I'm speaking with Karen and Gordon Palmer. So Karen, tell me, who was Jennifer?
Jennifer was Gordon and my first child. She was born on the 3rd of August 1993 in Rotten Row Hospital, Glasgow Royal Maternity Hospital in Glasgow, and she lived for 5 hours.
So all of this happened 27 years ago. Why now have you chosen to write the book?
I retired in October 2018, so I had always wanted to write the story of Jennifer, but I suddenly had time.
Gordon, you are, like me, a minister within the Church of Scotland and were at this time. How did you manage to go on ministering to folk when you were going through all of this hurting yourself?
Yeah, I think not just when she was born, obviously the run up to it too. We found out on Easter that the result of a scan that this was bad news, and indeed we thought Jennifer might not go to term at that point, and then it was about another 4 months, I suppose, before she was born. So I think for 4 months that was a time when I was living with we have a child but maybe not a child, or we have a child but we're not sure how this child is. I think we were pretty upfront in telling people, and particularly people in Rochese where I was at the time, that this was the situation and this was what was to expect. So I think we partly that was, I suppose, a defence thing, so that you weren't getting a lot of comments about looking forward to the birth kind of comments. But also I just found that built bridges. We were living in a community where there are a lot of hurts and suffering at the time, and in fact it just immediately, in a sense, even more immediately steeped us into that context, I think.
Karen, I can imagine it must have been something of an emotional roller coaster, from the excitement of discovering that you were pregnant, and then very shortly afterwards to the shock of that first scan.
We'd been trying for a family for a while, so it was very exciting when we discovered that I was pregnant. So we went for the first scan where you see the baby's heartbeat, and that was all fine. And then we weren't due to have another scan at all, because in those days, all that time ago, there wasn't a routine sort of diagnostic scan. So it was purely because, on a human level, it was purely because I was off work with a cold and had been conscious that the baby wasn't moving. And so I phoned and spoke with my midwife, who said, come in and we'll just check that everything's okay. So Gordon had actually taken a wee bit of time off that week, and so Gordon was free to come with me, and we both went. And long story but short, I ended up having a scan which showed that there were major problems, and my initial reaction actually was kind of horror and revulsion, really, and I think that's partly because of the terminology that's used in giving scan results. It might have been because the doctor knew that I was a doctor, and so was using more clinical terms, but they all seemed very cold. Terms like abnormality and various kind of medical descriptions for what was going wrong. So instead of being excited about having a baby inside me, it suddenly felt as if I had a thing inside me.
And Karen, you used the word revulsion there, and when you write in the book, you talk about that Jennifer had become for you a hideous thing, misshapen and ugly. Can you describe for us those emotions?
When we had the scan, it was Easter week, it was Holy Week. So we had services in our church every night of Holy Week. And I describe in the book the service on the Monday of Holy Week, when God spoke really directly to Jennifer. It wasn't even that we felt that God was speaking to us as a couple. It really felt that God was speaking directly to our baby and just saying how much he loved her and how he wouldn't abandon her, and that his love for her was really strong. It was words from Hosea that John Bell had rearranged and that we used in the service, and it was mind-blowing, just the directness of God speaking to our baby. And after that, there were stages in the grief. There was, I think when most people, when they discover a pregnancy, they have an ideal in their minds about what that's going to mean, and they have this picture of a perfect child and what that's going to mean in the future. And because suddenly our baby wasn't that perfect child anymore, there was a grief that followed. We grieved for the perfect ideal child that we weren't going to have, and then learned to love this different child, this unexpected child, who was still moving and kicking and growing. So by the time Jennifer was born, our love for her was strong.
I think also there was a sense of, let's try and make the most of Jennifer being with us in the pregnancy. And I think, our focus moved from what's she going to be like when she goes to school and etc., because that was off the radar at the time. It became more of Jennifer's with us as we're going to this place, or as we're here. Jennifer's with us when we go on a holiday. That kind of emphasis, I think helped us a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to imagine in the days after you had lost Jennifer, coming back home and in the situation you were in, being surrounded with children in your community and not least in the church. How was it having so many children around when you were bereft?
I think it's different for everybody who loses a baby, but for me, the children in Ruchesi were a great source of comfort. We used to have, anything that we ever put on for children in Ruchesi would be mobbed, and they were around the streets and they were just everywhere and full of life and mischief. And we used to have a family of boys who used to come up to our house. They were great to have around, and they were just very natural and very down to earth, and I think uninhibited in a way that adults can be quite inhibited, and talked more naturally about Jennifer than other people did, than adults did, which was great for me. So I really enjoyed the children coming around after Jennifer was born.
Gordon, let me generalise for a moment. We Scottish males are not renowned for being good at talking about things, and least of all about our emotions. How did you handle everything that you were going through at that time?
I am a keep your cards close to the chest kind of guy anyway. That's my natural default setting. But I think there was, we spoke quite a lot ourselves. I think that was, we were this together. I think there was that. I think, as Karen said, there was lots of folks around, folks to be in touch with. So I found myself actually okay in terms of I want to speak about Jennifer and speaking about Jennifer. The thing that I found most difficult was if I was speaking to others who were hearing about this for the first time. When I had spoken about Jennifer, the bad diagnosis we had and so on, if I was speaking about that for the 20th or 25th time, I was kind of used to it. But when you were hearing that for the first time, I was aware of dumping that on you. And so that was those I found quite difficult. But I think we were blessed by the uninhibited way of folks around us, and I don't think there was any way of kind of denial or wanting to play down. Really, I don't think that was on for us. So we just got on with it and talked.
Karen, you write in the book about becoming pregnant again pretty quickly afterwards, and being not sure how people would think about that and react to that. Can you tell me something about what you went through in becoming pregnant again?
I felt as if people might think I was being disloyal to Jennifer being pregnant again so soon. And I also worried that if people had been really, really good to us and really supportive after Jennifer died, well, during the pregnancy and then after Jennifer died, and I thought maybe if something else goes wrong, they'll back off and they won't support us. And I mean, that's what I've written in my diary, and in retrospect that seems a bit unfair on my friends who were really good. But I think it's probably to do with a feeling that parents who have lost a baby or who have a child who's got some problems, that there's some kind of stigma that the parent or the mother in particular maybe feels. And I think that's what I was experiencing. That in some way it was my fault, and in some way there was something wrong with me that made my child like that, and that other people would be put off.
When people meet someone who has been through this kind of tragedy, often they have not a clue what to say or how to say it. Can you think back to some of the best and some of the worst experiences that you had of when you were engaging with people?
During the pregnancy, the hardest things were people that disagreed with me. That I would say, they would ask something about the pregnancy, and I would say, well, Jennifer's not expected, our baby is not expected to live. It's likely that I'll miscarry, or that I'll go into early labour, likely that she'll die. And people would say things like, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. It'll be all right. I'm sure it won't be as bad as that. And try and disagree with what I just told them. And so some people gave me a row that I wasn't getting things ready for her. And that was incredibly unhelpful. And then after she was born, I don't remember very many unhelpful things after she was born. The standout memory is at her funeral, when a lady came up to me and put her fingers under my chin and pushed my chin up and said, don't worry, you're still young, you'll be able to have more, as if Jennifer was somehow replaceable, as if I wasn't there mourning the death of a individual, unique person. A bit akin to saying if you've lost a best friend, somebody saying to you, don't worry, you've got time to make new friends. It's just illogical. And I suppose people not saying anything. I know some people might think it's maybe better to say nothing than something, but actually I think it's probably better to say something rather than nothing.
Absolutely.
And I think it's hard and it's uncomfortable for people to say something, but it's better. And I think the safe thing to do is to mention the child's name. I mean, I love hearing Jennifer's name, and I know that about other people that have lost babies, that it really is a comfort to hear their child's name or to see their child's name written.
One key thing is for folks not to think that they have to say the right thing. There is no right thing. And I think that's what puts a lot of people off. I don't know what's the right thing to say, therefore I say nothing. I would say it's better to say something. Don't worry about it being the right thing.
I think there's a temptation when people are trying to think of the right thing, is they kind of imagine that what they're saying might help you feel better, but it won't. So people will say, oh, she's in a better place, or God wanted her more than you wanted her, or people say these strange things thinking that they're going to suddenly make you feel better. So don't feel that you can sort it for someone, because you can't. Just say that you're sorry. And I think one of the things is that you've had a baby, you've brought a baby into the world, and that's, even though she's not lived, that's still something to celebrate, because there's a life, that the life's been there during the pregnancy, and you have a child, and that's worth celebrating. But of course nobody's going to say congratulations when your baby has died. But I think even just to say, have you got any photographs? Who did she look like? What colour was her hair? Or just it's hard. I know it's really hard, but I think if people try and just ask questions, that also is really helpful.
If I was a stranger and we were meeting for the first time at some occasion, and by way of small talk, I was to say to you, "So, have you got family?" How would you answer that?
It has always depended on how I felt at the time, and so sometimes I just wouldn't feel up to saying, we had 3 children and 1 died. Just because I knew that then that would be awful for you, and I then would have to, for both of us, it would be awkward. Sometimes I would. More and more, since I've written the book about Jennifer, I've been spending a lot of time on Instagram. Our daughter Sally pushed me onto that to try and promote the book. And it didn't feel very comfortable to promote the book because I came into contact very quickly with a large baby loss community who talk about their loss, and so it felt exploitative to push the book too much. And what I have been gradually learning through them, because they're a younger, bolder generation, is that actually we need our generation is guilty of keeping things hidden for our comfort and for the comfort of other people. So in order to avoid your awkwardness and my awkwardness, I have often said we've got 2 girls, and I've talked about Ruth and I've talked about Sally. This younger, bolder generation are saying because we've continued to do that, baby loss hasn't been talked about, and people haven't learned how to be more confident about how to support people suffering from baby loss.
Sure.
There's a campaign at the moment called No Words, trying to help people to find the words, and I think that also involves the parents themselves, like us. Even though I'm going to make you uncomfortable, I'm still going to mention all 3 of my children, because I need to learn to say that and you need to learn how to respond.
Gordon, Karen's book is not an explicitly theological book, and yet theological questions are there throughout. Chief among them, how can we begin to believe in a God and suggest a God who loves and cares for us when this kind of stuff happens in the world? How do you answer that kind of question, Gordon?
Well, you don't answer it easily, and you don't answer it with a pat answer that tidies everything up, that's for sure. But I think if you have an open-eyed, honest look at the world, you see that there is suffering. You see that it's an unjust world. You see that it's a hurting world, and not just because I'm hurting or we experience hurts. Everybody does. And I think, therefore, how you see life or understand life has to take that into account. And so, yes, I think we live in a fallen world. We live in a spoiled world. We live in a world that's still, greatly affected by sin and all its ramifications. And the gospel is not you get taken out of that right away, but that God works with you, in you, through you, because He's also committed to unraveling something of that mess, and one of the ways He's committed to doing that is through people, and therefore, He's working in, with, and through folks. And I think there's plenty of indications in Karen's book that we felt helped and sustained and ministered to. And that was sustenance for us, and we found our affirmation in that. So I didn't think, and I was at a conference where the issue kind of came up, should I pray that Jennifer's going to be okay? Never ever thought that I should be exempt from the kind of suffering that other people are with. And so our prayer and our hope was for God to be sufficient with us in that, and that prayer was answered. We wrestle with all of these things, but I think denial's unhelpful. I think pat answers are unhelpful. But I think if we look for God's touch, we find that.
Gordon, what you're describing is very different to the gospel that is heard in many quarters today, sometimes described as the gospel of health and wealth and prosperity, that simply believing in Jesus and everything will fall into place and you'll be somehow immune to the problems of life. You're describing something quite different, aren't you?
Sure. Right at the heart of the gospel is the crucifixion of a guy who was innocent. You know, that's and also I found in Nicholas Walterstorff's book about Lament for a Son, I found it so helpful that the passage where he talks about the risen Christ is still scarred. You know, that the resurrection didn't take everything away and wipe it all away, but was who he was and identified with us. So I think that the health and wealth stuff is unfair. I think it's untrue to Scripture. I think it's inconsistent with crucifixion and so on. I think it creates false expectations. And I also think it panders to a selfishness in us. I should be wealthy, I should be fantastic. The gospel's much more about, you know, serving and caring and loving and giving. That's what God does, and that's what he's looking for us to do.
And Karen, these are not particularly theological concepts either, at least in how they sound, but you use some wonderful words to describe how you felt God was caring for you at that time. You talk about God cushioning you, and then you say that God couraged you in. Can you tell us a wee bit about how that felt?
That began really with that Holy Week service where we were very conscious of God speaking to our baby, even though she was unborn, and just aware from that moment that God was with us and that God knew about it. Everything that we were going through, God was aware of, and so he was present with us in all of it. And that was reinforced throughout Holy Week, through the other evening services, through the words. It was reinforced because we were aware of all the people praying for us. We were receiving cards and letters from friends of ours, from friends of my parents in their church, and the people in Rachesi themselves were wonderful at supporting us. They were people themselves who'd had to face tragedies and suffering, and they hadn't an easy life, and all the more, therefore, they knew how to support and how to be authentic with us. There was a gentleman in the church in Rachesi who'd had a difficult life, who wrote a prayer for Jennifer and for us every night and put it under his pillow before he went to bed. There were all sorts of stories like that. And people still, if we meet people from Rachesi, they still talk about Jennifer. They took her to their hearts even before she was born.
Karen, as we bring things towards a close, let me ask you this. What are your hopes for the book now? And if there are any people who are wondering perhaps about where help can be found in similar situations today, are there organisations that people can be referred to?
I wanted to tell the story of what happened continuing with a pregnancy where there are life-limiting, there's a life-limiting diagnosis. So I think sometimes just with the roller coaster that there can be of emotions, and also the, you know, like a conveyor belt there is sometimes in the hospital system, people can find themselves very easily when they get a diagnosis like that, moving towards terminating the pregnancy. So I wanted to tell the story of what happens when you don't. And because I think sometimes people think they've got a choice, but they're not aware of the options. We were given a great opportunity in that the doctor that did the scan for us gave us 3 days to go away and think about things. But not everybody gets that opportunity. So that was partly why I wanted to tell the story. There's an organisation called ARC, A-R-C. I can't remember at the moment what it stands for, but they quite often will work in an antenatal department alongside doctors, so that if there's a result like that, then they will provide some counselling. There's an organisation called Together for Short Lives, which liaises between antenatal departments and children's hospices, and so they again can provide support. That there's a movement called the perinatal hospice movement, which is a philosophy which is providing support for the parents and also for the unborn child, and then moving that through to hospice care if that's what's needed after birth.
Well, Karen and Gordon, I want to thank you so much for sharing so openly today about your experiences. I really do hope and pray with you that the book achieves all that you hope for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much
for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers.